Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
The Shabbos Daf Kuf Nun contains 3 Mishnayos, and we move from the halachos of forbidden speech on Shabbos and going to the edge of the Tchum to do something after Shabbos into the halachos of Amira, L'Nachri, and Ma'aseh Akum, when you're allowed to use an activity that a guy did for a Jew on Shabbos. Then we will be moving into the halachos of Tzarchei Ames, things which you're allowed to do for the dead, beginning with what you're allowed to do on Shabbos, then what you're allowed to do during the week, and along the way there we'll have a lengthy agadata about the status of the dead and the dying, and some halachas therein as well on Shabbos. So first of all, the Gemara wants to understand Abba Shaul's statement. We saw in our last Mishnah that there were 2 halves to the Mishnah. The first half said things which you aren't allowed to say on Shabbos, and the second half said things which you are allowed to do, meaning go to the edge of the Tchum on Shabbos. And Abba Shaul said that the 2 halachas are the same, but his expression for expressing the rule that whatever you're allowed to say, you're allowed to go to the edge of the Tchum for, the way he said it was that anything which I am allowed to say, I'm allowed to go to the edge of the Tchum to do. So that's 2 factors there. He said that if I'm allowed to say it, I'm allowed to go to the edge of the Tchum. That means he made the Tchum independent on the saying. And he said that what I'm allowed to, I'm allowed to. He didn't speak about what I'm not allowed to. So the Gemara says, right away I have a problem over here. Is which part of the previous halachas in the Mishnah is he referring to? If he's referring to the first part, there we spoke about things that he's not allowed to do. So his rule shouldn't say what I'm allowed to do. He should say whatever I'm not allowed to say. I'm not allowed to go to the edge of the Tchum. He should speak about not allowed to, because that's what the first part of the Mishnah was doing. And if he's referring to the second part of the Mishnah is discussing things which you are allowed to do, but it's first talking about going to the edge of the Tchum. So he should say that anything which I'm allowed to go to the edge of the Tchum, I'm also allowed to say. He can't be referring to the end of the Mishnah and then say that the halachos of Tchumin, Machshichin al Tchum, traveling to the edge of the Tchum is dependent on what you're allowed to say. This part of the Mishnah wasn't talking about what you're allowed to say. You've switched the order. You've made the halachos we're discussing dependent on something we're not discussing. The Gemara answers he's referring to the latter part of the Mishnah, but he's not actually commenting on what it says in the Mishnah. He's commenting on a related halacha, which both Abba Shaul and the Tanakama in the Mishnah knew as a davar Pashut, and that's halacha which is said by Rav Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, that you're allowed to tell your friend who's in a neighboring tchum, listen, I have some of my fruits in your tchum, you have some of your fruits in my tchum, you watch my fruits in your tchum, I'll watch your fruits that are in my tchum. You're allowed to say that. That's halacha discussing edges of tchumin, but that's halacha which says that you're allowed to say things. And on that, Abba Shaul was saying, don't you agree to this halacha? So you see that edges and speaking have the same thing, and that's what he's referring to. So the Gemara says, okay, very nice that he's saying that halacha, but if he's just saying one halacha, what does he say? This is the rule. His words are, this is the rule. Anything which you're allowed to say, you're allowed to travel to the edge of the tchum in order to do. There is no rule. What's this rule including? So the Gemara says the rule is including something else, and that we see in a brisa that quotes Abba Shaul in a different context. And that brisa says as follows: you're not allowed to go to the edge of the tchum in order to bring your animal. You're not allowed to go to the edge of the tchum in order to bring your animal into the tchum. But if your animal's standing outside the tchum and you're inside the tchum, you're allowed to call to him and he can come to you and walk to you inside the tchum. That's not a problem. On that, Abba Shaul says his rule: anything which I'm allowed to say, I'm allowed to go to the edge of the tchum in order to do. And that this applies to the following case, and this is a Mishnah coming up in just a moment. You're allowed to go to the edge of the tchum in order to take care of needs of a kala, a bride, or in order to take care of needs of a mace, the dead, such as to bring him a coffin or shrouds, and you're even allowed to say things about that, and this is the rule that he's including, that you're allowed to say things, because I'm allowed to go to the edge of the tchum, I'm allowed to say things. I'm allowed to say to somebody, go bring him shrouds, go bring shrouds. I'm allowed to say, if you don't find him here, go over there, and if you don't find him for 100, get him for 200. Now, basically, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees on that last halach. He says you can't mention actual numbers. You could say, if you don't find him for a little, get for a lot, or for double, but you can't say the actual halacha. Okay, that ends this Gemara. The Gemara now starts the next Mishnah, which begins with this halacha, and then it goes into the halachos of what you're allowed to use activities performed by a goy for the sake of a mace. So the Mishnah begins and says you're allowed to travel to the edge of the tchum in order to take care of a kala or the mace, such as to bring him a coffin or to bring him shrouds. But if a goy brought flutes, which are used in the eulogies, if he brought flutes on Shabbos, so a Jew is only allowed to use them if he didn't do any melacha when he brought them. That means that he brought them from within the tchum. Carrying is not an issue because it could be that there was an Erev, or you could have theoretically had an Erev. But tchumen is an issue. So if it was brought from within the tchum, a Jew is allowed to use them. The guy didn't do any malacha, and therefore the Jew is allowed to use them. Otherwise, the Jew is not allowed to use them. However, if the guy made a grave, he dug a grave, or he made a coffin, so that is certainly forbidden activity on Shabbos. So if the guy were to do that, so it depends. If he did it for himself, for his own use, or because he wanted to sell it, so then he didn't do it for a Jew. It's not activity done for a Jew. A Jew is allowed to use it on Shabbos. If, however, he did it specifically for a Jew, then it becomes forbidden to use forever. There is no heter at any point. It was always made for the Jew, and you can never use it for a Jew even at any point after Shabbos. The Gemara now begins, and the Gemara wants to know, when we say that the guy brought the flutes from within the tchum, that's okay. That means that we know for sure he brought it from within the tchum, or it means that there's a possibility that he brought it from within the tchum. Do we have to be convinced, or we just have to not have a situation where it's painfully obvious that he did a malacha for the Jews? The Gemara says, Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. According to Rav, it has to be clear that it was brought within the tchum and there was no malacha. According to Shmuel, it just has to be possible. Now the Gemara says we have proofs to Shmuel. There's a question here what the correct girsa is. Is there a proof from our Mishnah itself, or is it from the Brisa? But the two possibilities are as follows. First of all, maybe there's a proof from our Mishnah, because it says that if the guy made a grave or a coffin for himself or to sell, then it's okay. The Mishnah doesn't say it has to be proven that he made it for himself. That seems to indicate that it's enough if it's just possible, like Shmuel. Now, there's a brisa that also seems to show that. The brisa is referring to heating up a bathhouse. The guy kept the bathhouse warm and heated on Shabbos. Question is, who did he do it for? So the brisa says, here's the options. If the people who use it are majority non-Jews, then you assume that he did it for those non-Jews, for the majority, and therefore Jews are allowed to use it right away after Shabbos. The guy didn't do anything for the Jew. If, however, it's majority Jews, or it's 50-50. If it's majority Jews, he did it for the Jews. If it's 50-50, then he did it for both, which means he also did it for the Jew. Then you can't use it in any way that you benefit from it. You have to wait until the amount of time it takes to heat it from scratch after Shabbos. That way you didn't benefit from the fact that the guy heated it before Shabbos. You would have been able to use it at the time that you are using it anyway. The Gemara now says, and this is where it proves from, Rav Yehuda says there in the Brisa, that if it's a small bathhouse and there's a very highly important, respectable person in the area who's a guy who has a lot of servants, that he could have had a bunch of servants working very hard and heated it up very quickly right after Shabbos, then theoretically it could have been heated after Shabbos. Then as soon as it's hot, a Jew is allowed to use it right away, because theoretically it could be that it was really heated after Shabbos for this chashav important guy, and therefore it's not a problem. So you see that Shmuel is correct, that the only thing that has to be is that it's possible that it wasn't done for the Jew or on Shabbos, and therefore it's okay. Okay, now the Gemara asks, back to this Mishnah here, we had seen that if the guy made the grave or the coffin for his own use or to sell, then the Jews are allowed to use it right away. The Gemara wants to know, why don't you have to wait? Why don't you have to wait until the amount of time it takes after Shabbos? So the Gemara says that the situation over here is where it is clear that the guy did it for himself. How so? The grave he dug on a main highway. Jews never use graves on the main highway. That's not where we dig our graves, and therefore it's clearly done by a guy for a guy. What about the coffin? So that has to be that the coffin was placed, it was made next to a grave on an open highway, and therefore it's clearly meant to be used in this grave, and therefore it's not for a Jew. A situation like that is clearly not done for a Jew. You don't have to wait until after Shabbos. Okay, now we get to the next Mishnah. This Mishnah lists a number of things which you are allowed to do for the dead on Shabbos. And of course, the body itself is muktzah, but you are allowed to do the basic things to take care of it without violating muktzah. And they are as follows. You're allowed to do, the Mishnah begins, it says you're allowed to do everything for the mace. You're allowed to rub it with oil, you're allowed to wash it with water, as long as you don't move any limbs. You can't actually lift a leg or an arm. You're allowed to pull the pillows and blankets out from under it in order that it should lie on the sand so that it'll be cooler. The warmer it is, the faster it will begin to decay. you're allowed to tie the jaw so that the mouth shouldn't fall open. You're not allowed to close the mouth because that would be moving a limb, but you're allowed to tie the jaw so it shouldn't fall open further. And similarly, if you have a beam that broke in your house and your ceiling, you're allowed to support the beam. You can't raise the beam, but you're allowed to support it. You have to use a cleat to support it. So you could use a bench, a long bench, or a bed which you'll stand on its legs, on its headboard or footboard, so that it stretches up to the ceiling and supports the beam. The Gemara until the next Mishnah contains one halacha and a bit of agadata about the death and the dying. So the Gemara first of all says that we had seen over here that you're allowed to wash and rub oil on the dead. The Gemara asks, but we have in a story that Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that a student of Rabbi Meir followed him into the bathhouse, and he wanted to wash the floor for him. It was a stone floor, and he said, "You're not allowed to wash a stone floor." And he wanted to rub oil on the floor, so he did not let her rub oil on the floor. So now, obviously, what's the problem here? Why can't he wash the floor and rub oil on the floor? Obviously, it's because the dirt is muktzah on a dirt floor. And even though this wasn't a dirt floor, it was a stone floor, but still, you're not allowed to rub oil on anything zera that you'll mix it up with a dirt floor, which is muktzah. So you shouldn't be able to rub oil or wash a muktzah thing anyway, and that should include the dead body. Someone says the issue here has nothing to do with muktzah. The issue over here is that if it would be a dirt floor, you would end up filling holes and smoothing down lumps. That would be smoothing a floor. That's forbidden. That's either building or planting, as we saw earlier in the Masechta. And even though this is a stone floor, there is a gzeira because stone floors are easily confused with earth floors. However, that doesn't apply to the dead. The dead are not confused with earth floors, and therefore it's not forbidden to do these things on the dead. Now the Gemara says when the Mishnah lists all these halachas you're allowed to do for the dead, it starts off by saying you're allowed to do kol tzarchim, you're allowed to do everything. What is that kol including? The Gemara says it's including you're allowed to place a cold kalim, meaning that they're made of glass or metal and therefore have a chilling effect. You're allowed to place that on the stomach of the body in order that the stomach should not swell and then eventually break, because that is something that happens. As Shlomo HaMelech says in a pasuk in Koheles describing the dead, and he's saying that you should remember Hashem before you die, and he says there that the stomach breaks. And the Gemara now explains all the phrases in the pasuk one by one. The pasuk says as follows: you should remember Hashem Ada Shalo Yerosek Chevel HaKesef, before the silver rope breaks. That refers to the spine. Rashi says it's white like silver. V'taras gulas hazav, and the golden bowl will shatter. The Gemara says that's referring to the stomach, which blows up and then breaks. V'tishavar kad al mabua, and the pitcher will break at the fountain. The Gemara says it refers to the male organ, which is a fountain of children. V'naritz agalgal al habar, and the wheel will shatter in the well. The Gemara understands gagal as galal, which refers to fecal matter, and it's saying that the refuse that is inside the stomach will fall back up to the mouth when the stomach implodes. So that is like Rabbi Levi says, the name of Rav Papi and the name of Yeshua, after 3 days the stomach implodes and it falls to the face. And the stomach pretty much says to the mouth, here, take back everything that you gave me. I don't want it. Now, the Gemara compares this to a pasuk in Malachi, which says, V'zerisi perish al panechem, I will throw your waste matter onto your face. And then it says, perish chagechem, the waste of your holidays. What does that mean, the waste of your holidays? And where it says, this is referring to people who make all their days like holidays. They're busy eating and drinking and being merry all the time, and they're leaving Torah behind. Those are the people, these revelers, is to whom this is applied. Okay, now it comes the next Mishnah, which again discusses the halachos of the dead. The Mishnah says what you are not allowed to do. You're not allowed to close the eyes of the dead, not on Shabbos. And if it's during the week and he's dying, as he's dying, you're not allowed to touch him, because any slight touch can hasten the departure of the soul, and therefore you're not even allowed to close his eyes. And if somebody would close the eyes of a person as the soul is leaving, he would be considered a murderer because he has hastened the death even by a little bit. The Gemara now has primarily Agadata. It's discussing a brisa quoted by Rishon ben Elazar about how to close the eyes of the dead. And then the Gemara quotes a number of other brises that Rav Shimon ben Elazar says on similar or related subjects, discussing the dead and also talking about poor, poverty, how one could avoid it, and how one has to be careful from it. So first of all, the Gemara quotes a brisa that says that somebody who closes the eyes of the dead as the person is dying is like killing him, just like we saw in the Mishnah. And it can be compared to a candle which is sputtering and about to go out. Even if you touch it slightly with your finger, that can cause the candle to go out and you're hastening the death of a candle. Same thing applies to hastening the death of a person. Now, Rav Shimon ben Elazar's first brisa, somebody wants to cause the eyes of the dead to close. What he should do is as follows. He should pour wine in his nose, and he should put oil between his eyelashes, and then he should grasp the two thumb toes of the dead, and that'll cause the eyes to close by themselves. Next, by Rav Shimon ben Elazar, a child who is a day old, you're allowed to be Machal Shabbos for him, but even if David, Melech Yisrael, king of Israel, once he has died, you cannot be Machal Shabbos for him, because a child, even if he's just a day old, you're allowed to do things for him in order to save his life, so that he'll be able to keep many Shabbosim afterwards. We say, break this Shabbos so that you can have all the Shabbosim the rest of his life. But the dead, even if it was a tzaddik like David HaMelech, there are no more Shabbosim for him to keep, because once a person has been lost from the world, he has lost all his opportunity to do mitzvahs. Like Rav Yechanan says, in the pasuk, on the pasuk in Tehillim, it says, Mesim Chavshi, the dead are free, that once a person is no longer in this world, he is free from any responsibility or opportunity to do mitzvahs. Next verse of Shimon ben Elazar says, a child that's a day old, you don't have to guard him from weasels or from rats, mice, things like that, but even Oigmal Chabashin was a giant and strong, but once he died, you have to protect him from tiny creatures like mice, because the Torah says, that as long as you're alive, v'chitchem, like from the word v'chai, you'll have marachem, you'll have the animals will fear you. That was the blessing that was given to mankind as long as they're alive. The animals are afraid of them. However, once they have no longer living, then there's no more chitchem and there's no more ema. Rav Papa adds here, though, he says that a lion will not attack two people walking together. It says mora'achem, so it's plural, so a lion will not attack them. The Gemara asks, what do you mean? We have seen that lions do attack even a pair of people. The Gemara says that must be somebody who already has a decree. Those people must already have a decree upon them that they are meant to die, and therefore they look to the animals like behemoths. Like it says, Nimshol ka behemoths nidmu, which we say a drasha, Nimshol, if the animal is ruling over them, then ka behemoths nidmu, they must appear like animals to him. So the lion just views these people as beasts, and therefore he's not afraid of them. Okay, next the Gemara says, or Rabbi Chanina says, it's forbidden to sleep in a house by yourself, and anybody who will do so is at the mercy of the female shade called Lilith, who is possibly the mother of all the shadim. And now the next verse of Shimon ben Elazar says, Asay ad she'ata moitza u'matzoi l'cha v'oidcha biyadcha. You should do tzedakah and give charity as long as you can, as long as you still have money, and as long as you're still alive. And that's what Shlomo HaMelech said in Koheles, in the same context as what we said before. Remember Hashem, remember your Creator while you're still young. Ad asher lo yavoyu me'ira, before the bad days come. Bad days refers to when you're old, the Gemara says. And the days will come when you say, I don't have any more desire. The Gemara says that's referring to the days of Mashiach, actually, because there's no more desire, there's no more challenges, there's no more mitzvahs, there's no more averis. The Gemara says that interpretation doesn't fit with Shmuel, but Shmuel says that in the days of Mashiach there will be challenges. As a matter of fact, everything will be the same. The only thing that will be different is that the Goyim are not going to rule over us anymore and disturb us from doing our mitzvahs. Like the pasuk says, Ki lo yachtal evyon mekarav haaretz, we will never have the poor lost from the land. There will always be problems like poverty even in the days of Mashiach. Okay, similar brisa, Tanya Rav Elazar Kapar says a person should always ask for mercy about poverty, because if it doesn't reach him, its son will reach him, or its grandson will reach him, or it'll reach his children. Because like the pasuk says, Ki begala davar hazeh, that if you give charity, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bless you, and He will keep you from suffering from poverty too much, but otherwise it affects everybody. And the Gemara quotes another brayso of Dibei Rabbi Shmuel. It is a wheel which cycles through the world, and eventually some people are on top will cycle to the bottom, and some people that are on the bottom will cycle to the top, and that's how poverty works. Now, the Gemara says, Rav Yosef says, however, a Talmid Chacham will never become poor. The Gemara says, is that true? We've seen Talmid Chachamim who are poor. The Gemara says, even if they're poor, they don't have to go around knocking on people's doors to beg for food. Okay, now the Gemara's incident here. The Rabbi Chia said to his wife, when poor people come to the door, give them bread in order that when our children will be poor, people will feed them and give them bread. So she said to him, well, you're cursing us. Who says we'll ever reach such a state? What's that for? So he says, what do you mean? It's pretty explicit. As the pasuk says, if you'll give tzedakah, so then Hashem will spare you when you are in your time of need. And the Rabbi Shmuel said, it's a wheel, it goes around. People that are on the bottom go to the top. People on the top go to the bottom. Another brayso, Rabbi Gamliel Barebi says, "V'nasan l'cha rachamim v'richamecha v'hirbecha." A pasuk in Devarim. So what does this mean? He will give you mercy, and he will be mercy upon you, and he will make you plentiful. Anybody who is merciful on others, Kadosh Baruch Hu will be merachem on him, will have mercy upon him. Anybody who is not merciful on others, then Shemayim will not have mercy on him. Okay, now back to the context of Koheles, where Shlomo Melech was saying, make sure you remember Hashem before it's too late. So it also said there, Ada shaloi techshach hashemesh, until the sun should not go dark, v'ha'or, and the light. So what does that refer to? So the Gemara says that refers to your forehead and your nose. Your forehead is the shiniest part of the face, and the nose gives light to the entire face, meaning it lights up, it illuminates your countenance. Okay, next thing it says there is v'hayarech, and the moon, that refers to your soul. The Gemara says kochavim, the stars, that refers to your jaws. Then it says v'shavu avim achar geshem, and the clouds will return after the rain. The Gemara says that refers to the fact that the light of the eyes dims after too much crying. The Gemara says, Shmuel says that after you're 40 years old, the tears don't return. Once they're gone, they're gone. Up until 40 years old, they do come back. And Rav Nachman says, if you use eye medication called kachol, so until you're 40 years old, it'll help heal the eyes. Afterwards, even if you put so much eye makeup on, eye ointment on, so much that it weighs like the weight in the weaver's machine, it may help the eye, that it shouldn't deteriorate further, but it's not going to help it recover. So what does this teach us? The Gemara says this teaches us that if you use a lot of that eye stuff, it's better than if you use less. Okay, another story here. The Gemara says Rav Chanina lost a child. He had a daughter who died, and he didn't cry. So his wife said to him, why aren't you crying? You think we just lost a chicken here? This was your daughter. So he said, what do you want? We should lose a child, and I should become blind also? If I cry, I'll just hasten my blindness. I'll lose the light of the eyes. The Gemara says he held like a statement of Rav Yochanan and Rav Yossi ben Ketzarta. There are 6 types of tears, 3 which are good for the eyes and 3 which are bad for the eyes. The 3 that are bad for the eyes are tears caused by smoke, by sadness and crying, or caused by standing in the bathroom. 3 which are good for the eyes are caused by a potion, tears from laughing, or tears from various fruits and vegetables which are sharp and cause the eyes to tear.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.